right. Well, hello, everybody, on this beautiful, beautiful day in Rochester. Thank you for coming to this event. But even if you had better things to do in terms of weather-wise today, I'm really glad that you're here to learn from Aaron Newman. Aaron, as some of you may have read in the bio, has now done 4 startups. He's on the 4th one now, where he's CEO. It's one called CloudCheckr. In total, they have 150 people, about 2/3 of those here locally. And of course, through a journey of 4 different startups, you learn a lot. And I think we're going to hear a lot of very interesting things today. But I'd love to start off, Aaron, by learning about how did you become an entrepreneur to begin with?
Well, I mean, so thanks. I want to start by saying thanks, Richard, for inviting me, and it's a privilege to be up here. So, and I'd like to say 4 startups, and you know why? Because I can't get a job. No one will hire me. So, you know, I kind of feel like I have to start something because I don't know what it'd be like to be an employee at this point. So, but you know, how did I start my first startup? I mean, really, it was my first startup, and I think that's the hardest startup, right? I mean, how do you convince somebody? You know, you either have to convince somebody to give you a ton of money, or you have to have a bunch of money yourself, and then you're going to work for years and years to grow the business, give up your salary, pay other people, and you're going to work really long hours. It's like a horrible idea. Why would anyone want to do this? But I worked when I was very young for a software company. I was one of the software developers there. A buddy of mine was one of the sales guys. It was maybe 15, 20 people, and we walked into work one day, and the owner, who was not a particularly good person, wasn't particularly smart, or wasn't very ethical either.
He's like, not here tonight, is he?
No. This is actually in New York City, but he walked in and said, I sold the company last night for like $25 million, and I was like, you know, if this bozo can do it, why can't I? And I was just young enough to think I could pull it off. Wasn't smart enough to know all the challenges I hit. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to start writing software in my apartment. Got my buddy. He said, I'm going to start, you know, selling it. And we were timing, right? Most of startup lucks is timing, right? You still have to work hard and be in the game, but you have to be at the right time. This was 1998, which was the dot-com bubble. And so anyone who had a dog in a garage, you know, you could sell a company. If you had a website, it was worth millions of dollars. So, you know, so we were very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time. We worked for maybe 6 months, and we worked hard. I mean, I'd work every morning till 6 a.m., go to sleep, wake up at noon, and go back to writing software. I put on about 50 pounds in about 6 months because all I was doing was coding. But, you know, somebody came along and bought us just because it was the right timing. So, and that, of course, was once you start one, the next one is easier. And then if you finish that one, the next one's easier. So it's always easier. But the first one, I always say, is so hard. It's like you've had an uphill battle. So
now, one of the things that I think a lot of people wonder about is what's the right kind of background in terms of professionally, educationally. And I know that you thought you were going to be an accountant. Actually, kind of started off that way. I mean, what do you? First, I'll talk a little bit about how you learned to actually code and be a technologist, but also the role of the different skill sets that you think it takes to be able to create your first company.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm very, very fortunate. I came out, I didn't know what I was going to do when I went to college. I came out with an accounting degree, and I was like, I don't want to do this. This is crazy. So I started writing software, just no formal education, just picked up books. And luckily, software is so young, such an immature industry, you know, or it was back then, that if you read a book, you were an expert, right? Like with a doctor today.
Like social media.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so if you have a Facebook account, then you're a social media expert. So.
Uh-oh, I'm sorry. The exception that proves the rule right there in the second row. Anyway, sorry, you were saying?
So I just love writing code, right? So it was very natural for me, and I could spend 16, 20 hours a day writing code, and that's what made me happy. So I don't think I would have been successful without that love of what I'm doing. So obviously you have to do something you really love. Like if you don't love doing what you're doing, you're not gonna be able to do it for 20 hours a day. So very fortunate that software is the hot thing right now. Or has been for 20 years, and you know, I think I'm good enough at it. Although some of our software developers at CloudCheckr are here, and if they've ever seen my code, they kind of laugh hysterically at it. They've actually locked me out of the system at this point. They actually moved the source code control system just so I didn't have an account anymore. So now I just wander around the office thinking, what am I going to do now? They won't let me code. So.
Well, let me ask you about your second company. So you mentioned the first one's the hardest. You had success there. And then for the second one, you raised $22 million for the second startup. Can you talk a little bit about what that was and kind of how that was different from your other experience?
I mean, every startup has been so different. I mean, that's the funny part. The first one was just bootstrapped. I was 25 years old. I had, $10,000 of 401k. We bought 3 servers for $500 each, and that was all we really had. And so the second one was the other extreme, which was we had we had sold a company previously, so now I had a little bit of of reputation. So we were able to raise money. So we raised, and actually we raised the initial money, and then I didn't want to raise any more, and you kind of got swayed into raising more money, and it actually ended up being bad because we just raised too much capital and we didn't run it efficiently and lots of problems. So I mean that company we grew to about 200 employees, 25 million in revenue, but that was the worst company. That was the least successful company for me. Other companies that only had 15 employees or 20 employees were more successful, because it's not about how much I raise. Like everybody thinks, oh, if you see this company raised a ton of money, that's a success. That's actually not a success. The success is how much revenue did you generate, how many employees, what kind of exit did you have? So so that company was the least successful one. Other companies where I had 2 employees was a better outcome for me. So.
Now, I believe, though, it was after that second one, before the third one, that's when you moved to Rochester, correct?
Moved to Rochester.
And how was the creation of that third one, and how did you find creating a company here versus other settings?
Well, what I love to do is say, okay, what's going to be the next hot thing, right? What's the, back in 1998, security was a brand new industry, and for me, that was exciting. I like stuff that's brand new. Once it becomes mainstream, I get my attention span's very small, very short, so I get bored. So by 2006, when I moved to Rochester, security was getting pretty mature. So I was like, what's the next big thing? Social media. So I started a Twitter account. I was a social media expert. Yeah. So, but back in 2006, social media was still people blogging about their cats, and nobody cared about it. But, I knew some people like Mark Frisk here in the crowd and others who were like, companies are going to become really dependent on this for their marketing. And so we started building a listing platform for that, and then sold it to marketing agencies, and was able to grow it for 3 years, and then sold it to a company in the UK. So it was very different in Rochester, because in New York City, where the last one was, people were throwing money at us, and we raised 22 million. I didn't want to raise that much. Actually, when I came here, couldn't raise a dime. Right? So. And it was multiple factors. One was it was harder because, in Rochester, people didn't quite get the software industry. So I'd explain the software model, and, people understood bricks and mortars a lot better. We've come a long way since then. That was 2006. Also in 2008 was when the market tanked. So, you trying to raise money then was not a good idea either. So, for me, it was all based on the money I had made from the other startups. I spent on that, and, I was down to maybe like $25,000 left in my account, of all my assets before I sold it. So it was definitely very, my wife at the time was very like, what are we doing? We're going to go bankrupt, blah, blah, blah. So, but I don't know what else to do.
Blah,
Nobody
blah,
hired
blah.
me.
That's how entrepreneurs think about risk. So, yeah.
Right. Right. So I mean, but what else am I going to do? I don't know what else to do. So
now you mentioned at one point when we were talking before that actually it was during the course of that third startup that you quite accidentally came upon the idea for the current company.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what that discovery was?
Right. So we had built a social media listing platform, which was one of kind of the early stage. The early big data problems was we were collecting billions of conversations a day from Twitter and Facebook and blogs. And so we were buying servers and buying memory and hard drives, getting them shipped to the office. Then I'd drive them down to Netsville, which was a data center here, put them in there, and then the power would blow at 2 o'clock in the morning. All typical stuff that, why would anyone build a data center? So, and the company that acquired us spent like $8 million to build a data center. And the fire marshal came in at the end and said, the floor doesn't hold this load, you got to take a bunch of stuff out. So that was kind of my aha moment for why is anyone building data centers, right? It's just a commodity at this point, and this cloud thing might make sense. So, and again, when I was pitching social media in 2006, people were looking at me like I had, a third eye, like, nobody, that's people blogging about their cats. Why would I care? And now social media is everything. And back then I talked to people, even local people, at Paychecks and be like, hey, the cloud is the next big thing. It makes so much more sense. And they'd look at me like, we're never trusting our data in the cloud. And so we've come a long ways. And today it's like, the blockchain, right? Everybody looks at you like blockchain and cryptocurrency. That's nonsense. We're never going there. So that's my next big bet is, I think blockchain.
Okay. So one of the things that I
Did
find...
you hear the mumbling when I said that?
No.
Wow.
Yeah. So one of the things I found really interesting, I don't know if this will cause mumbling or something else, but I think that there's this perception that when people are successful entrepreneurs, as you were a number of times, that certainly by the time you get to the fourth startup, there are going to be no issues, like everything's going to be smooth sailing. And one of the most compelling things I heard was that in 2014, not that many years ago, because you wanted the company to keep growing, you sold your home
right.
in order, blah, blah, blah. I mean, to
right.
Big deal, right, to keep it going. But I think that's really fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about what was going through your mind and what you think that means in terms of being a good entrepreneur?
I mean, so my first three startups they were all good, and they were successful outcomes. They were never home runs, right? It wasn't like I had the FU money or anything like that. So, so for my fourth one, I mean, we were running it. Myself and my co-founder Aaron Klein, who is a Wall Street guy, were running it, and it took a while. And honestly, we couldn't raise a dime again. All the local startups with the Boston people, we had people say no for 4 years. Nobody wanted to give us a dime. So we were just financing it ourselves, and we were just pouring all our money in it. And, I had a nice little house over on Ambassador Drive. It's not the biggest house, but it was a nice one. I ran out of money. What's that? It was a big house. I ran out of money, sold it. And use that money to keep running it. So I rented a house on Barclay Square Drive, which is a nice neighborhood, but definitely much more modest. And just kept paying our employees, not taking a salary, paying our bills, right? Because I didn't know what else to do, right? What am I going to go get a job?
No, that's definitely not that. And then last year, a big event, right? Private equity firm came in. Can you talk a little bit about how your life's been different since that transaction?
Right. So we raised. We kept getting people approach us and considering buying the company, and we just fall down at the last step. So finally, we said, let's get an investment banker, and so we hired an investment banker, and all of a sudden, it is like the world's turned very quickly. Like one deal we had was. A deal we had, and I'll throw numbers out there because I'm fairly transparent. The last deal that kind of fell down at the last minute because we walked away was for like $28 million. And we were like, well, let's not screw that. Let's get an investment banker and help. And they ran a process, and all of a sudden, at the end of it, we had a dozen people with an $82 million offer. So, they made a huge change, right? And you know what? I look at myself and I'm like, you really suck at selling companies. Right? Like,
well, no,
I brought somebody in to help me, and it tripled the value. I suck.
Well, but I mean, there's definitely a lesson there. And look, I also had a company where private equity ended up being involved. I mean, they're experts. Once you get to that point, it's more than worth the 3 to 5% you typically end up, or better if you can,
Right. But the good thing was, so we were able to take a $50 million investment from a New York City private equity company, Level Equity, and a big chunk of it was secondary, which was liquidity. So our founding team, the people who had been working for 6 years, were able to kind of see an exit, right? They were able to get some liquidity, so I could buy back a house that I had sold. But we also had a big chunk to put into the business to grow it. And what it really did was allow us to go long, right? Previous to that, we were always trying to figure out, well, I got to sell this because we're hurting. And I'm not making a salary. And boy, any offer that would come along, there are many times I would have sold the company for $3 or $4 million and been happy, right? And so, but nobody wanted to buy it. So, it was a forced, hey, you got to stick with this, and it ended up great at the end. But it was definitely a very humbling, like, when nobody wants it, there's crickets out there, and then all of a sudden, if it gets hot, everybody wants a piece of it. But so we're able to actually go long because now I had taken, and our management team had taken enough liquidity out so that we're comfortable enough to say, let's go long, let's build something. So now the vision is, how do we build $1 billion company in Rochester, right? I mean, I've made enough money. I'm very modest. I've made enough money where I can live comfortably now. Now, how do we do something that's interesting and compelling? And how do we build an industry here that, can be an anchor for Rochester? How do we put something here that's cool, and how do we hire 1,000 people in the next 5 years to make CloudCheckr, add to the community, help out, and my next success, I think, is how do I get people that actually eventually leave CloudCheckr and go start their own companies in Rochester, right? I know a lot of people typically, like they'd hate that people are leaving and going and start companies. I think that's a sign of success, is that other people have good ideas and are going starting things, and it's not just you being successful, but other people and spreading that.
Now, I know that one of the things that you think about is you run into a lot of people that say they want to run a startup. Now, those who've had a front row seat, like the people on your management team, people who've seen it, they probably really know what they're getting into. But talk a little bit about, I mean, what are perhaps the realities that everyone should be aware of before they commit everything to being in a startup?
Right. Yeah, I mean, listen, everybody wants to be a startup, right? Nobody says, I want to go work at Paychex or something like that. I guess I shouldn't say that here. Let's say IBM. IBM. Nobody wants to work in a big company.
So don't worry about it.
I love to rile things up a little bit. But, everybody wants to do their own startup, grow their business. But, nobody really wants to work till 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday. Nobody wants to give up their salary. So those are the type of things. So it is very hard. If you want to do a startup, you have to be willing to do that. Your hobby has to be work, right? Your weekends are going to be work. So you have to be willing to sacrifice that. And it turns out in the long term, if you could pull it off, it could be successful. But, you definitely have to have the right obsession. You have to be a little bit obsessive compulsive. If you want to work 9 to 5, startups are tough. And you have to be willing to risk it all, right? You have to be willing to sell your house and say, if this screws up, I'm back on the street. But, I think that's part of it. But, so different personalities make sense and can do startups. But you have to be willing to take that risk and do that extra effort.
I mean, I know that one of the other things which you talked about, which is really interesting, and you alluded to it earlier as we were speaking. There is a presumption among many, especially kind of early entrepreneurs, that as soon as you have an idea, that the next thing is, I got to raise a bunch of money so I can fulfill this entire business plan that I've nicely outlined here, and I can't really get started until I do. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that's a mistake?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, ideas are worth the paper they're printed on, right? Everybody's got an idea. And, everybody who's in stealth mode and, this is my secret idea, it's always, you want everybody, you want to share your idea with everybody, get all the feedback as soon as possible and just, iterate over it. And startups are about execution, right? It's not about the idea. It's about, can you actually, convince people to come work for you for half the salary they're getting paid someone else, convincing somebody to give you cash because your business is going to be big, but you don't have customers, you don't have a product, you don't have so it's a lot of uphill work. So and now I've lost my train of thought.
No, so in terms of course, so did I. That's great. Love it. See, I was already thinking of.
Is this water? Yeah, ideas are.
No, it was also about the money, though. It's in other words, this idea that basically I need money before that I'm not going to start.
You have to expect you're not going to raise money. Raising money is hard, particularly in the Rochester market. So if you come in and sometimes people come to me and they say, what, if I could just raise $10 million, my idea would work. And that's the wrong philosophy, right? You have to make your ideas work. And then if they work, maybe you can raise $5-10 million. But You really have to you're going to have to get it off the ground by yourself. You expect other people to step in and make it happen. You're going to have to do it without the money. So you got to come up with a real business model. How are you going to make this scrappy, and how are you going to get it off the ground, scrape together credit cards, whatever it is. But don't expect somebody to just give you the $5 million and then it's going to work.
And you mentioned a couple of times that you had a little bit more difficulty raising money here. But what are the positive attributes that are kind of Rochester specific that you think actually make this a good place for you to have started your company?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan, right? This is we've hired a management team. We've brought them here to work in Rochester. We've hired a guy from New York City. He lived here. Guy from Boston's come here. We're hiring a guy from Albany to come here. So it's, I'm a big fan that actually Rochester is a great place to start a company. And a software company's tough because, they all are typically in Boston or Silicon Valley. But I think it's a huge competitive advantage is that in there, everybody wants to go work for Facebook, and how would I start and run a company there? Here we have people that really are loyal and they love it, and it's a better quality of life, and it's you don't have people demanding $300K salaries as a software developer like they do in the Valley. So we have a huge competitive advantage over our competitors. Because we just have a different model. We could do things financially responsible. We're not burning. Our biggest competitors out of Boston raised $100 million, and they're probably 12 months ahead of us, right? And because they've just burned money, because they're in this environment that's totally different. Ours is just it's a Rochester environment, which I think is way better for how we run our company. So we love it here. We're big believers. We want to be an anchor company here in 5-10 years. We want to be around. And, this is where our family is, and this is where we want to be. So,
and you talked about, and obviously are planning to scale up, have already scaled up, especially in the last year plus. Do you have certain ways that you assess people that you're interviewing to really figure out maybe non-traditional things that you're looking for in their personalities, their answers, to figure out if they're going to be a great fit?
Yeah, I'm awful at interviewing. I can't figure anybody out, When I hire people, I'm like throwing darts at a dartboard, so I have no clue. It's hard.
That was not a prepped question.
I never know if anybody's.
That's what happens when you go off script.
I never know if anybody's good or bad until 3 to 6 months after I hire them, honestly. So, but yeah, you want people that are in our environment. I need to find people that are scrappy. Pull a lot of people from RIT. The most important attribute of somebody coming out of RIT is that they have to be willing to stay here. The one thing I don't want is a co-op who's going to be here 6 months and then wants to move to the Valley. I'm just training them and losing them. So I want people that want to stay here. I want to stop the brain drain. So, but you need people that are scrappy, that are going to do, that are not going to talk about doing it, that are actually going to do it. People that want to work hard and are not prima donnas, things like that. Like at my startup, until probably a year ago, I was the guy that took the trash out. Right, I'd go we had an office in East Avenue, and it was, stereotypical software startup. It was mostly guys, and mostly in their 20s, and nobody took the trash out, and it kind of stank in there. And so I would walk in, and I'd be like, guys, the trash is overflowing. Does anyone notice this? And they'd all stare at me with blank stares, so I'd take the trash out. So, but that's my job, I got to take the trash out, so.
And that's an interesting analogy, and I think this will be the last question, then we'll take some questions from the audience. That was an interesting analogy or example with you taking the trash out. I know that in the past you've compared the startup and that journey to Sir Ernest Shackleton and some of your admiration for him. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so unfortunately I could go on for minutes about it, for hours about this, but I have written in my arm, Fortitudine Vincimus, which is the family motto of Ernest Shackleton, who's one of the Antarctic explorers during the heroic ages, the 1911s. I'm sure most of you had heard his story. Stuck in Antarctica for 2 years, didn't lose a single person in his crew, and this was 1911. They didn't have helicopters to rescue. They're basically clubbing penguins over the head and eating those to survive. But his motto was, through endurance we conquer. right? Which is, for me, that's what the startup's about. Like, it's not about having the best software day one. I'm not the best coder. I'm not even the brightest guy, right? But, it's about sticking with it and working. CloudCheckr's 6.5 years old. It took a long time to get here. The first 5 years was everybody telling us, that idea, we don't think it's going to be that big. We're not going to give you money. We don't want to buy. So it was all about endurance. It was about sticking with it. So I think that's the most important attribute of and I'm going to tell one more story. I think we're running out of money, but my co-founder,
I'm sure he meant time. Was that a Freudian slip?
What'd I say?
You said, I think we're running out of money.
No, running out of time. Sorry. I'm constantly running out of money. So, my co-founder, for whatever reason, I got him signed up. We were both running the Can Lake 50, which is a 50-mile run around Canandaigua Lake. And believe me, I'm no runner. I'm about 220 pounds, and that is not healthy for your knees. But, it's through endurance we conquer. So I can't run very fast, so I have to go further and further to try to challenge myself. But I convinced him, before we were starting the company, I was like, he was being obnoxious, making fun. I was like, come run the race with me. And he's like, okay, I'll do it. And we finished it together, and it took about, 15 hours to do the thing. And, we were like the last ones to finish. But it really qualified. That was kind of my proof this is the right guy to start a company with. Because A, he was stupid enough to do it. Right? Why would anybody want to do that? There's no real reason. And B, he was stubborn enough not to stop. Right? He just wouldn't quit. Like at one point we were going up Vine Valley Hill on the east side, and it was about 80 degrees that day, and he's like, I can't see my hands. He's wobbling, and I'm like, put some ice on your head. Doesn't listen to me, but finally puts the ice on his head, and he's like, wow, that really works. But he finished, right? And neither of us had any capabilities to really finish, but it's about just struggling through.
So if you're willing to sell your house, put up with the conditions of going to Antarctica in 1911, and
right,
go through a horrible experience running with you. That's the essence.
Yeah, and there's a cute little. If you go search on the ad that Ernest Shackleton put out to find the people that would want to go on this voyage, and it was something to the extent of, long journey, low paid, long hours, chance of survival, remote, great, pride and rewards if you happen to make it back. And that was kind of like a startup. That was signing up for a startup, right? Hey, I'm going to pay you half what you could make somewhere else. Chances are we're not going to do very well. It's going to take years and years and years. We're going to work in this awful little office that stinks. Who's up? Who's up for it?
But I guess I'll ask you one other question. Would you want to be doing anything else other than this?
No, listen, I miss the days of being back in that office. Like now we're not in fancy offices. We're in nicer offices. We have cleaning people in the office now. But listen, I still reminisce about, I miss those days in the East Avenue office. I'd rather be there coding away with Mike Bryce and the other 22-year-old people who have no real business writing software with me.
All right. Well, Aaron Newman, good luck building the next humongous company for Rochester.
Thank you.
And everybody, can you please
thank you.
give a round of applause?
And thanks again, Richard.